What's up, everybody? Welcome to the very first episode of Lunch and Lore. I am Tormented by Gnomes, co-creator of Anacra, and joining me is NinjaManMat, also co-creator of Anacra. Matt, how are you today?
Good. About yourself, man?
Good. We were panicking a moment ago because we were talking about how this show is actually going to start on time, and literally as I gave Matt like a 20-second countdown, his stuff froze. Just at that exact moment. It was hilarious. So essentially, this show is designed to be a 1 hour casual hangout in a different time slot than usual, where Matt and I just start hashing out some different pieces of Anacra lore, and it's for a couple different reasons. One is because nobody is going to stop us. Two, it's a way for us to like get off of our butts and actually do the world building. It's that thing where if you have a public commitment, you're more likely to actually do the thing. Three is hopefully a way for us to share some of the cool stuff that we're working on with our fans. We always appreciate your support. It's very humbling to see people engage with Anacra and get into the world. So we'd like to reward that by giving you a bit more of the behind the scenes insight into how it all fits together and how it all ticks.
Yeah.
Yes, good. So we picked a topic today, the Otherworld. And mostly I picked that because the last Book of Dawn plot thread heavily dealt with the Otherworld. Two, because it was an easy thing to pick. And three, there's a lot of different ambiguities about the Otherworld that we have not nailed down. And part of that is the nature of the Otherworld is, ambiguous. But there's a lot of different aspects to it that can be confusing. So we set out with a few different questions. Let's see. Well, first off, what is the Otherworld? Second, what sort of creatures dwell there? Third, how does it fit into Anacra and the Four Kingdoms? And fourth, what is a spirit versus what is a fae? So let's go ahead and start hashing through these.
Well, first of all, we've already done quite a bit of work on laying the ground. I think what we're really focusing on is kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of this, right?
Yeah, well, partially it's getting into the nitty-gritty and partially it's explaining the groundwork we've already laid out to fans who may or may not know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about let's go back to the beginning. When the sovereigns divided the Dawn world into the Four Kingdoms, they assembled it very deliberately. Each kingdom had a different role to play, not only in fitting together to form the firmament to keep out other infernals and invaders and such, but also now that the world wasn't one and matter and energy and willpower were different things, they needed a system of worlds that would all sort of work together in order to make sure that life could continue to flourish. So in the Four Kingdoms, you've got the Underworld, which sort of serves as the core, the root, and the wellspring. It's where the elements flow up. All the elements and life energy and other core substances and essences of the Four Kingdoms, they have their source in the Underworld, and they flow up like being drawn from the roots of a water table or like a spring up into the mortal world. So when everything's... Go ahead.
Oh, and it's important to note, just specifically in Anacra, Underworld doesn't necessarily mean God, the gods of dead and things like that. That's definitely there, but even before Ramius had pulled down all of the Infernals and their ilk to the Underworld, like you were describing, it was mostly a place where the elemental wellsprings flowed through into the rest of the kingdoms from there. It really isn't like an undead or even demonic place. It's become that for sure, but primally it has a much more, I wouldn't say pure, but definitely primal purpose. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like if you compare Anacra to the Great Wheel of... No, I can still hear you. If you compare Anacra to the Great Wheel of the Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk and so forth, the Underworld is really doing the work of the inner planes, the elemental planes and the positive and negative energy planes, because whenever someone dies, their life energy disperses, it goes back into the Underworld to be recycled, and then flows back up into the mortal world to give life to some new creature. Whenever the elements decay, same thing. They decay, their new forms flow down into the Underworld to be recycled, and then they flow back up as refreshed elements. So So we've got the underworld sort of forming the core, then the mortal world on top of that, sustained by this upwards flow of energy, and the other world coexists alongside it.
Yeah.
It's this exaggerated, brighter, darker version of the mortal world. The two of them are coterminous. They exist, or they're coexistent. They exist like mirrors of each other. If you step from the mortal world into the underworld, or into the other world, you're likely going to step into an exaggerated version of wherever you were in the mortal world. So in a mortal cave, you step into the other world, you're going to be in this fantastic crystalline cave, or a really dark and spooky cave. You cross over in a desert, you're going to be in this fantastic oasis, or this desert of burning fire, something like that.
Absolutely.
It does the work of the Feywild that you would see in other campaign settings. So when the sovereigns were assembling the four kingdoms, what was it that became the other world, and why does it exist?
Well, initially, I think what we were going for is that when the Otherworld was crafted, they had to separate all of the husks of the new creatures that were being created once everything basically went to heck effectively after the Infernal showed up. And when they had to split everything, they were keeping that spark of the dawn, that spark of creation, and they made a place where all of the creatures that didn't want to give up the grandeur that they were used to, they gave them a place where they could still hold on to that, at least in essence. Very different from the rest of it. I mean, you figure the Underworld and the Sky Kingdom, they're probably similar, but the Mortal Realm definitely far and away lost all that made it glorious and wonderful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like in the Dawn world, no creature was bound to a single form because your thoughts shaped matter and energy around you. Thought, will, matter, and energy, they were all sort of the same Dawn substance. So nobody was trapped in a single form. So what ended up happening was, with the advent of the four kingdoms, a lot of creatures were forced to assume permanent forms, because that's now the way that the mortal world worked. Those energies were no longer one and the same. So the effortlessness with which you could change your shape was gone. So the mortal world is bound by all these rules, and the other world is sort of the opposite of a shadow. It's where a lot of the creativity, freedom, and ideas and spirit, not as in like actual, a dead person's ghost or soul, but spirit is in creative spirit or the ideal. And so this world is largely composed of magical energies, more so than it is of physical reality. So, and it looks like Matt is having some technical difficulties at the moment. Naturally, the universe chose this exact moment to screw his internet. Matt, let me know when you're back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. Everything else is working just fine, but Discord keeps tripping out on me.
What's happening is this is a cursed stream, as somebody already said. Like, we literally picked the one time a day that everything's just going to go to hell. You probably lost some of what I was saying. I was saying that the mortal world is bound, now that matter, energy, thought, and will are no longer the same thing. The mortal world is composed of substance, right? It's composed of the elements, and it follows natural laws. And the other world is sort of a reflection of it that isn't bound by those laws, but also doesn't have the same level of substance. It is more ethereal, more incorporeal. And because of that, its ability to impact the mortal world is limited in some ways. So there are creatures that dwell in the other world that could not survive or literally cannot enter the mortal world because they don't have the right kinds of bodies to do so. They aren't. Exactly. They're derived of abstract ideas, and those abstract ideas don't have any form in the mortal world. And that's why you have, and that sort of leads us, I think, one, into why the other world is this heightened, exaggerated version of the mortal world, because it's where it's almost like, it's not quite the Platonic realm of, Plato's forms, where he thought that there was an ideal form of everything and that what we were seeing was just the shadows of those ideal forms. It's more like the opposite. It's like you've got the real version of everything in the mortal world, and then the exaggerated ideas and whimsy of what people imagine it could be projected into the other world.
the way I completely agree. The way I see it, it's almost like, like when you're just hanging out, like, like if you were describing that we in the real world, if that was the mortal realm, and you have those thoughts like, what if I was incredibly buff? Or, gosh, I wish I could just drop 10 pounds. Or, man, I really wish that I knew everything about Shakespeare's, plays. And just all these thoughts and ideas that we go, gosh, I really need to put a lot of work into to actually get to that thought or get to that process or place. And in the other realm, if you have enough will there, that just is reality. You have a at least a semi-mutable form, or like you said, you're one of those beings that never subscribe to actually assimilating to this Anacra's current idea of function and form. They are still a lot more loosey-goosey, and you can just do that. You can say, hey, I am, the May King, and I want to have, thorns for boots, and that just happens. It's not anything that he has to go out and craft or do. As long as you're in your lair or in your dements of some kind, you have basically full control over what you can do there.
That being said, it's still more bounded than the Dawn world, which is why creatures creatures of pure thought or abstraction are the weakest creatures in the other world. What you end up having that are stronger, let's take a look at our Archfey. Let's take a look at the May King, for example. The May King is the spirit or the Fey, the Archfey of a particular type of tree, the whitethorn tree.
Yeah.
And that is important because that gives him a tie into physical reality. The most powerful entities in the other world sort of dwell between both worlds. If you're purely of the other world, then you don't have any power over the mortal world. But if you are the incarnation or spirit or idealized form of something that exists in reality, that sort of gives you an anchor to matter and substance, which means that your power is much more real rather than illusory.
Oh, yeah.
So
absolutely,
a lot of the Fae are the spirit. That some of the Fae, does that tie to a physical thing sort of give a being substance? Yes. There are things in the Fae world, the other world, that just can't cross over to the mortal world because they're too abstract, and they can mess with your head in the other world. But like if you came back to the mortal world, you wouldn't have any injuries from them. We don't really talk about those, largely because I just made them up because it was a logical extension of what we're describing, but also because most of what people deal with are the supernatural spirits of like trees and natural phenomenon and so on and so forth. And a lot of the Fae are that. They sort of rose as the abstract identities, spirits, etc. of real life mortal things. And because, again, the May King is the spirit of the whitethorn tree, he takes on some of its attributes: beautiful and soft in the spring, and harsh and cruel and a prankster the rest of the year, like a thorn. So he sort of mirrors these things, but in return he has real corporeal power. He can take form in the mortal world. He's got tons and tons of magic. He's got followers, all these things because of this link between the two worlds. And one of the most important things about the other world is that it requires the mortal world. Like the two of them,
absolutely,
yeah, they're interwoven.
Well, and I think mainly for Anacra itself, having ties to a form is incredibly important. I mean, look at the four main deities, the sovereigns. I mean, each one of them is tied to an element. I mean, that's about as tied as you can get. Each one of them represents a facet of what makes this world what it is. And you figure everything going from the Titans, even down into the Fey Lords, Demon Lords, everything, you kind of have to assume a domain or some kind of attachment. If you don't have an attachment, like you said, you can't create real change. You have to, it's almost like if you focus yourself too much, like for instance, like, like mortals and whatnot, they're locked into bone and blood and sinew and stuff like that. And so with a form like that, they can do a lot of really permanent but smaller changes. Whereas if you take more like an ideal, like for instance, if you grab someone like Ziliar is about the cycle and rebirth. He's fire, he's radiance, things like that. He has a domain, and he has things that he's kind of, when you think of Ziliar, you're locked into this ideal of this burning crusader phoenix type person, and you're able to use that to create a lot of different effects. But it's still kind of varied enough to where you're a little more mutable than someone like Joe the blacksmith, And
also that explains why Titans and other entities use mortal vessels, because the mortals are highly real. I think we just invented like a sliding scale of abstract to real. And the more real you are, like the more limited you are, but also the more permanent stuff you can enact. Whereas if you are highly abstract, you're less limited, but your ability to effect real change on the world becomes more limited.
I mean, if you think about it, it's almost kind of like what we're doing right now. We have all these amazing ideas that over the course of the last decade, we've been coming up with and pulling together to form this amazing world that we've been playing in, that we didn't know about for the first 5 or 7 years. And now the last, half decade, we've been really focusing on it. But if you think about it, mortals or things that are tied to a physical form is like writing it down on paper. It's putting it down,
publishing it,
and it's publishing it. Whereas having an idea is great. You can have a lot of amazing ideas and you can change the world with numerous amazing ideas, but unless you actually put it down either in a written form or writing it down, you have to execute. And mortals are amazing at executing. And if you are a being that both can execute but also come up with these amazing ideas, it's almost like a worker drone. You base your given instructions and you're said, hey, do this thing, and you're going to make a lot of change. Are you going to actually do a lot for the world or be able to affect a lot of meaningful changes? That remains to be seen. But if you actually are doing the work, at least you're going out there and you're making it happen and you're affecting things. And I think that's, like you said, you tried it perfectly. This fighting scale between ideas and action.
Ideas and action. I think that's what it is. First off, we have a question from chat. If you were to eradicate all the whitethorn trees in the real world, would the May King lose his power or puff out of existence? I think he would fade away. I don't know if I would explain the mystery of what truly happened to him. But if the May King, who is the embodiment of the whitethorn tree, if all the whitethorn trees were wiped out, his tie, I would call it, his tie was broken, right?
I would think he'd more so be like we did with Anacra. He'd be discorporated. You wouldn't kill the May King by just killing all of the trees that he is associated with. First of all, killing all those trees, that is like an epic level ritualized thing. So are you really going to go around and cut down and burn and destroy that's insane. But if you do, I feel like the May King, the entity that is the May King, is still going to be there, is still going to be present. And I feel like unless you did it all at once, that entity is going to have an idea this is happening, and they're going to. It would be a quest for a party. They would save away some seeds, and your plan is to take these seeds and go and plant them somewhere, a grove of some kind that is hidden, and it would bring back this. You don't be an entity like the May King, and you have like, oh no, I hope they don't all chop down all my trees, But yeah, it's definitely an excellent question. But I feel like. It's one of those things where, as mortals, even though technically we can get up to 20 intelligence in a game, entities like that, regardless what their stats say, like you mentioned before, mate, especially Fey Lords, they're big on their whole button philosophies. And whether it makes sense or not, they have backup plan after backup plan. There's no way that would permanently happen. But if it did, I feel like it would be a discorporation.
Yeah. Well, I think it might actually be more than that, because Anacra gets discorporated, right? Uzul uses a sword forged from iron, distilled from the Earth's own blood, stabs Anacra's avatar, essentially her persona, and discorporates her. And everyone says that she was killed, but Anacra is Earth, is the element of Earth. As long as the element of Earth exists, she exists. Completely hypothetical, disregarding like how you would actually accomplish this, and let's just go ahead and agree that it's essentially impossible unless you're at the silence. If you eradicated the element of Earth, I would argue that Anacra would cease to exist.
Oh, absolutely.
And then I would argue that if you eradicated all whitethorn trees, what happened to the May King, he may not completely cease to exist, but it would be even more severe than what happened to Anacra, because Anacra's avatar was discorporated, but not her like thing that she is the entity of. If you destroyed all the whitethorn trees, I feel like the May King would be reduced to a vestige at best, right?
That makes sense. No, you're right, because like you said, it's the form versus the. If you kill the May King's avatar, here's the funny thing. We had it to where when Anacra was slain. Now I think part of it is if you just killed Anacra, I'm of the opinion. Now it would rock the world of things if that was the case, but I feel like it was the way in which Anacra was slain. Like if you just walked up with a regular sword and just beat her enough to where. Now here's the thing: could you actually
her stat block, right? Like if you defeated her stat block,
would she be able, even if it took a millennia, to form a new avatar, or was it the way in which she was destroyed by Uzul crafting this thing that was perfectly meant to destroy her? and that is why she can't reform. Because, for instance, if you destroyed the physical form of the May King, wouldn't they just over time assume another avatar because you didn't kill all the trees?
Yes, that's exactly what would happen. Arakura was only discorporated because it was done the exact right way. If you just happened to have a stat block for a freaking sovereign, and you happen to be the blasted munchkin who built a party that could take one down, it would be, just a temporary setback.
And I really feel like, in a way, like we've covered, it's one of those things that it has to be done in one single horrible, almost ritualistic blow. Because if you're about to destroy a sovereign, once they get to half health, if they're not already in their domain and you found them in their lair and there's nowhere to hide or run, I feel like they're just going to pop out of existence, and there is no more problem for them. It has to be just this one devastating campaign level artifact that you built with the sole purpose of doing that.
And it's not like there's only one way to accomplish it, but you would have to go through so much trouble to make that stick.
Oh yeah,
like you said, a whole campaign about it.
Secondarily, kind of jumping off what you were saying before, I feel like it's because, I think we can kind of agree. If you destroyed all of fire, that would be horrible, and things would eventually die.
First off, it would destroy Anacra. That I would argue that would destroy the world.
That's what I was. If you destroyed either water or fire or air or earth, you have to have all those things to have life. If you got rid of literally one of those elements, there would be no more Anacra. I would think if you were trying to permanently discorporate Arakura, you would have to go to the underworld and somehow remove or destroy or fracture the wellspring of Earth. And basically, it's kind of like, I think the wellsprings in the underworld are the hearts of the sovereigns. Because, like you said, if you were to have a thermal detonator the size of, France, and you put it in the center of the Earth and blew up the Earth, and there's no more Earth, there's no more Anacra, because we have so many things that are the whole world of Anacra is based, like we talked about. It's a nets with clouds woven in, and you and I have sat down before and built out the world of Anacra, and it is all so dependent on the base, which is the mortal realm. There's things that lay over and around it, and I feel like without the mortal realm, even the Sky Kingdom would start to have issues, because without the clouds that form around the atmosphere of the Earth, per se, what's going to happen to the Sky Kingdom? I feel like even if it can destroy it, it would fracture things and ruin things so much, not having that base anymore.
If you destroyed any of the four kingdoms, the whole thing would start to unravel.
Exactly.
It would 100% be bad. So I'm actually trying to pull up a file if I can locate it.
That being said, for anybody that does play with an Anacra, I think it would be a very interesting campaign if you had it set to where some mad being did destroy the mortal realm, and then you had these fractured islands where you had this storm that rose out, and then what's left of the underworld kind of becomes the base of the of the ground level, and then you have these islands that are a mixture of the Sky Kingdom kind of merged with the Otherworld, and then they're like these floating pockets that hover over this just dimension of death. That would be a very interesting take on Anacra. I think in canon it wouldn't work, but if you wanted to take that and make a thing out of it, that would be a really interesting way to get Swashbucklers of Seven Skies into Anacra.
All right, we got a couple of questions from chat. Let's just run that through. We answered that. We talked about that. Is that related to that one Golden Bough adventure where they spent the last 15 minutes trying to write the berry that repels the Chardalon? I don't remember enough of the details of the spell that they ended up creating. It's probably connected in some way.
What was the question about a Chardalon? It was cutting out for a second.
It was just, is that, and I don't remember what that is, related to, there was an episode of the Golden Bough where they created the berry that protects Otis Vale, and they spent 15 minutes trying to craft a spell properly worded that would do the trick.
Gotcha.
So if you wiped out all the whitethorn trees, would people's memory of the trees somehow keep him alive in a ghostly form? Yes, he would exist as a vestige because of the memory. And but that's different from Arakura. If you eradicate all earth, well, people's bodies are made of earth, so you've just you've changed the laws of physics, everything's collapsing, everything turns to jello, etc. But if you wiped out all the whitethorn trees, people's memories, especially because Fae represent stories and legends, that is part of their essence. It's more than just those things have real power when it comes to the Fae. So people's memories would keep a vestige of the May King alive in some capacity. It would not be the same as the entity we know now, but something would endure. Sean was saying sovereigns probably have stat blocks akin to gods in the Forgotten Realms. Yeah, probably. Greater, pretty high tier gods. All right, cool. So that's pretty much it for the questions that we had. Let's double check our questions that we had asked ourselves. So what is the Otherworld? We sort of established that. What sort of creatures dwell there? I think we've talked a little bit about what constitutes a fae, but we've also got spirits, right?
Yeah, I feel like what is a spirit versus what is a fae kind of merges into what sort of creatures are there. And you and I actually recently had a discussion about what spirits are in an Anacra setting, and I feel like our definition of spirits, just like our definition of like genies versus elementals and things, that is definitely a little more flux for us. But I feel like a spirit, and the way that we define it, is different than an undead, even a corporeal one. When we talk about spirits, I think we're mostly referring to entities that, like you were kind of saying, that had a form, that were connected to something, whether it be immortal or otherwise, that when they pass on, they don't go through the normal checklist that you have to go through Ramius, or you have to get, it's a P word. What is the word when someone is protesting for you?
Petitioned?
Petition, thank you. When you don't go through the same levels of petition and whatnot, you are able to have a strong enough will and form to where you kind of carry on. A lot of this happens in Cost, where you'll have a lot of ancestor spirits, where they were somebody that was so just set on their family or their honor or something that has to do that they are lingering, but they're not lingering like a ghost. They have some kind of vengeance they need to seek.
Right. It's not a disruption of the natural order. It's part of the natural order that they continue to exist in this new form. They undergo an ascension or transformation of some sort. Now, when I think of spirits in Anacra, I oftentimes say it's a pretty large blanket category. Like you could argue that fae are spirits, elementals are spirits, incorporeal undead are spirits. But when we talk about spirits in the context of the Otherworld, first off, it 100% includes those people that you described. That's where a lot of ancestor and hero deities come from. We don't always go into super detail on the religions of Anacra, because the religions of Anacra are a lot bigger and more widespread than just, I worship the sovereigns, I worship the titans. You have a lot of local deities. And oftentimes those local deities are either cultural heroes or they are local spirits. So in addition to mortals who have died and ascended or transformed, you've also got things like the spirit of a particular river, the spirit of a particular mountain, so on and so forth. Exactly. And those often dwell sort of half and half in the Otherworld and in the mortal world. So the spirit of a mountain could appear in the mortal world, but also resides in the Otherworld version of that mountain.
Because the roots of that mountain go past the boundaries that separate the realms.
Right. Not every river, for example, has a spirit that will wake up and mess with you. And we're sort of not clear on exactly how that spirit will manifest. I would argue that you could create a new elemental, like a custom written elemental, and say, this is the spirit of this river. But you could just as easily whip up a new fae and call it the spirit of that river, and it would still apply.
You know what I've actually been doing in my home game, which I think is a good application for this, is when you cast a spell such as Find Familiar or I think Summon Mount, the Paladin has it. What I've done is make it to where instead of, because you know how it talks about you call either a fiend, a celestial, or whatnot, and then you form it into a bestial creature to act as your familiar or your mount. I usually will have them tie it either to a river. For instance, the Paladin in my game, he actually has the spirits of the main river that goes through this region, and he called upon the spirit of that river to help carry him through his adventures. And it has a big tie where that because it's connected to that river, anything that has to do in or around that river, and depending on what you use, it could be a great tree in the center of a forest, it could be a river that runs through the world, it could be a mountain. But if you connect your familiar or your summoned mount to something like that, I think it gives it, because for instance, if you just summon a pseudo dragon, it's fun, people love pseudo dragons, but having this spirit that you summon and you use in order to assist you in your journeys, having it connected to something that either is important to you or important to that region, I think it gives a lot more stock into what people are into the experience that you're playing. You know what I mean? And I think it's a good way to kind of apply that.
I agree. Couple good questions from chat. First off, sovereigns are embodiments of elemental forces and the like. Is it possible to manifest a god via worship and devotion? This is a really, really good question. It's something that we've talked about a lot. In the Forgotten Realms, God needs prayer badly.
Yes.
where deities are sustained by prayer. If they don't have worshippers, they fade away, they lose their powers, etc. In Anacra, worship and devotion is a form of energy and a form of power. And you can harness that to do big things with it. You can do that while you're alive. Like if you were alive and you have people praying to enough people praying to you and believing in you, that can grant you incredible power, turning you into sort of a saint or a living god. But it's not the primary method of divinity in Anacra. The primary method of divinity in Anacra is being the incarnation of a fundamental aspect of the world. The sovereigns don't require prayer. They don't really care about it at all. Like they yeah, sure, they get some energy from it, but because they are the elements, they're so fundamental to the universe that it's just a drop in the bucket for them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you can agree with this, but I feel like, especially in Anacra, religion draws followers, whereas cults require followers, if that makes sense. Like if you are trying to get powerful, having people follow you and worship you and pray to you, there is a sense of power that you can get from that. But I feel like those are more so for upstart powers.
Yes.
By powers, I mean like entities. Like we said, things like sovereigns or even titans, things that are mainstays in this world, they're either so old or so paramount to the existence of Anacra. The followers are nice, but they're not gonna waver the power of that being.
Their admin permissions are hard coded into the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially. Now let's talk about the Infernals, because the Infernals, they do draw power from worship, but they don't really care about drawing power from worship. It's nice to have. What the Infernals benefit from is having mortal agents, because demons and fiends cannot themselves enter the mortal world.
Which is why possession is so important to either undead or to fiends, because they usually don't have a mortal, like we said, they don't have a form that they can take on the mortal plane unless they do something like that.
Or if they get a mortal summoner, because mortals, they live, they are inherent, they dwell in the mortal world. Their magic can overcome Ramius's edict that banished all the Infernals. So by getting mortal followers and teaching them dark magic and training them until they're powerful enough to open permanent gates and cast summoning spells and such, the Infernals can expand their influence into the mortal world, where they're usually trying to, like, all the Infernals want out, right? Every single Infernal is probably working on some way to get rid of the Emerald Tablets that Ramius edited so that they're all trapped down there. But there's other goals that they have as well. Bring more souls to join my forces, piss this person off because I just happen to like chaos, etc., etc. So sovereign,
you figure because they are, I'm sorry for cutting you off, but like because they don't have the same kind of a regular existence that a mortal would, their sense of time, like we mentioned, really kind of going back to the Otherworld, where you could be there for a minute and it is 100 years, or you could be there for what seems like days and days and days and it could literally be a second. Even though it's not the exact same in the Underworld, time is very just they don't really care about it, I would assume.
Feel it. Like, if you're mortal, you're already withering away because the Underworld is sucking you dry and drain your energy. And if you're not mortal, there's nothing to give any sensation of the passing of time.
Absolutely. I just feel like for the Infernals, I feel like for the most part, they'd be, since they're locked in one realm, in one area, and especially because in that one realm, because of Ramius and the other Infernals and beings down there, they have such a small reign of control compared to other things. I'm sure they don't even bother with... They still look for the Emerald Tablets, but I'm assuming they know they're not going to find them. So I think that they would be spinning their wheels, putting too much energy into that. They, of course, are asking their followers, hey, keep an eye out, look around, whatever. But I think they're more so doing, like you're saying, power grabbing. And that's why worship is so important for them, because they need to be able to, because any schmuck wizard could summon an imp or a quasit, They need to build people up and, like you said, teach them the rites, the magics, and really just get them powerful enough to where they could summon either greater beings or even eventually themselves.
A few big plot points have occurred where the Infernals almost got somebody to actually summon them, to actually work the magic that would not end Ramius's edict, but create a one-time exception. And doing that, using the magic to actually bring an Infernal into the mortal world, is outrageously difficult. So a lot of their plots revolve around that, because it's I don't have to change the rules if I can just break this one rule. Now, the Titans, when it comes to worship, Titans, I think, stand to gain more from worship, but they, because of their relatively lower power, and again, if you're just joining us, Sovereigns are the 4 elemental gods, and Titans are their offspring in creation, so they're still quite powerful, and they have an elemental essence. But the Titans often like worship because it gives them a way to enact their will in the world rather than it makes them more powerful, because Titans are similarly hard-coded into the universe. Exactly. Zalar, the Sun Rider, is already incredibly powerful, but has some very strict ideas about how Infernals and their followers should be treated, and the more people obey him, the more people he can turn into vessels of his glorious light, and, you know, the more Infernal worshippers he can smote. So Titans don't really need that much worship. Archfey like it a lot, mostly because they tend to be vain and they tend to just, you know, like the attention, but it also does give them a form of power. I think the entities that rely most on worship are the entities that are the furthest away from being hard-coded into the universe, especially like ancestor gods, hero deities, former mortals, stuff like that. They're the ones who say, look, if I can get enough worshipers, that can catalyze, you know, that can make me powerful enough temporarily. You know, if I run out of worship, then my power source is gone. But if I have enough worship, while I have all this power, I can eat some cosmic energy field so that now I can stay a god regardless of whether or not my worship fades away. Absolutely. But it's not like Forgotten Realms. Anything else to say about that before I go back to chat's questions?
I was going to just jump on, because we were talking about what sorts of creatures dwell in the Otherworld. I did want to kind of touch on what you were saying, because we did spend a bit of time in the Underworld, which, I mean, they're all connected, so it is important to touch on that.
And tangents will happen with this show. That's inevitable.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that, much like how, for instance, before Ramius pulled all of the fiends to the Underworld, even though you had the worlds separated and broken apart, there were still big things running around. Even nowadays, you have giants and dragons and things running around in the mortal realm. There are still very powerful, immense creatures that dwell there. There's elementals, all sorts of things. But regardless, I think one of the reasons you have beings like the Fey Lords, or even elementals that dwell in the Otherworld, the reason you don't see them kind of flying around and doing their thing in the mortal realm more than you do is because you had a Titan that said, hey, there is this classification of really powerful otherworldly being that is running amok in the mortal realm. I'm going to send them literally to hell. And I think that's just declaration to the rest of the kingdom saying, hey, any old Titans, even the cupbearer of the gods, could just decide, hey, I'm going to spend 500 years researching their world tablets, finding out all I can, and then I'm going to say, hey, genies, I never want them back here again. And so you have a lot of these really powerful beings that, even though they could make a lot of waves in the world. For instance, we had talked on stream a while ago, in the game we had, why aren't more big players reacting to a Shardalon? And I think in a big way, it's because so many creatures and so many beings are playing this weird dancing on eggshells, skirting each other, because no one wants to do enough to piss off another creature to get them to spend the time it would take to say, hey, I never want to see you again. And so people play this weird dance now, you know?
I like that. I think I'd put a slight spin on it and say that Ramius is the only one who understands that. So to people who don't really get what's going on, but they're like supernatural, genies and stuff, those who are sort of more ignorant might say, well, if I cause too much of a muck, somebody might, just decide to say, screw you, go to hell. But to people who are a little bit more in the know, they know that Ramius is the one who figured it out, and nobody else has ever gotten as close as Ramius has to rewriting the laws of physics. But they're still like, Ramius once spent 500 years after his mother died studying the laws of physics so he could change them, and then he sent all of creature type X to the underworld. So maybe I won't screw with that. No, I do like that. The other thing I was going to say is that we know we've got elementals. To a certain degree, elementals dwell in the Otherworld, but it doesn't tend to be your standard CR5 ye old fire elemental. Fire elementals are called up from the Underworld, from the Wellspring. What you
until they're summoned, they don't even really exist until a creature brings them into existence. They just are magical energy from that Wellspring that is given form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, precisely. So what the elementals you're more likely to encounter in the Otherworld are genies, especially genies. Genies much prefer the Otherworld. Like they all prefer to dwell in the Otherworld. So maybe some of them are in the Wellspring, but for the most part, a Marid will dwell in the Otherworld version of the ocean in this fantastic, gigantic coral palace. An Ifrit would dwell in the Otherworld version of a desert, in this gigantic fiery oasis or something. because the Otherworld is this idealized, heightened, exaggerated version of the mortal world, and because genies have actual elemental essence, they can do a lot there because they have both. Genies in Anacra are sort of this take on creative direction plus the elements. They were created by the sovereigns and the titans to aid in the shaping of the world from the elements as the creative directors. And so they thrive in the Otherworld. Most genies dwell in the Otherworld. So you stumble into this oasis, and it's actually a crossing into the Otherworld, and now you're in this genie's, domain.
I also feel like, kind of touching on what you were saying, the other elementals that you're likely to see, and I don't have all the names of them because I've only looked at their sub races because of what we were working on, but the original elemental dwarves, like the Grapha, they're mostly probably going to be in the Sky Kingdom, but you're going to have other dwarves that are absolutely the original, the dwarves literally of earth or literally of ice, yes, or literally of fire. Those dwarves are going to be in various places, like the Underworld, the Otherworld, the Sky Kingdom, depending on where they have the greatest association with.
I could easily see the fire dwarves dwelling either in the Wellspring or in the Otherworld.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. We talked about, and then you've got things like water weirds and myrmidons and other elemental spirits that are more creative than just ye old block of earth brought to life. And those are likely to dwell in the Otherworld, and they're likely to classify as spirits. Again, a custom elemental or a custom fae could be the spirit of this river. They dwell in the Otherworld version of things, so on and so forth. We do have some questions about the image that we've brought up, which I will address in a moment after I check on chat again.
Oh, where'd you drop that image?
It's on the stream right now. It's the Four Kingdoms image. There's a lot going on. I brought it up to illustrate a point, and then I forgot about it, so we'll talk about it in a sec.
Oh, gotcha.
Would local species involvement with a river, etc., help bring it to awareness or whatever, like awakening or realifying it? Yes. It's not always consistent, though. A river could be awake, alive, and have a huge personality when it's completely uninhabited by sentient life, just because that river happens to be cantankerous. Or a river could be, dormant and not have a form, and then people live on that river long enough that they slowly awaken it. I could easily see that going both ways. I don't think there are any other questions in chat except about the image that we have up. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. The number 4 is hugely, hugely, hugely important in Anacra. There are 4 kingdoms, there are 4 seasons, there are 4 elements, there are 4 directions and 4 different winds and 4 different times of day and 4 different steps in the cycle. This image is sort of the cycle. And the cycle is the fundamental, it is the law above all laws, not only in Anacra, but in the world before. Birth, life, death, and renewal. Everything is tied to the cycle in some way. Even the existence of worlds themselves. The world before was born, it had its peak, it declined, it died, and because of the death of the world before, a new world was born from it, Anacra. So Anacra exists in the context of this infinite cycle of birth, life, death, and renewal that encompasses all the worlds before it, and ostensibly will cover the worlds after it. Every element, season, time of day, and direction is tied into one of these elements of the cycle. The question was, does this image imply a book of dusk, a book of night, and a book of dawn, of noon? The answer to that is no, not because it doesn't make sense, but because the Book of Dawn was not a cosmic artifact that spontaneously arose from the world. The Book of Dawn was created by the Archmage Ioth, who was an Alfar, a Dawn elf. The elves are also tied into this cycle, different elves tie into different parts of it. The Alfar, the Dawn elves, the High elves, they are we haven't seen them a whole lot. There was an episode of Tales from the Golden Bough where there was a city ruled by the Dawn elves where they basically enslaved people with enchantment for their own good, air quotes. Not all Dawn elves, Alfar, are like that. The Dawn elves tend to be those who most closely remember the Dawn era before the world was divided into 4 kingdoms. They hold that time dear. They tell stories. They remember the beauty and the grandeur of that reality. Whereas the Huldra, the Dusk Elves, who are, the Wood Elves, they love the physical world. They love the mortal world. They love the trees, the beasts, the birds, the sensory elements, all of it. They are deeply connected to the mortal world. The Alfar yearn for this previous time, and they mourn its loss.
Well, and also, in a way, you kind of have the Alfar who kind of, in a way, are really into the Otherworld because it's as close as they can get to the Dawn Realm. Mm-hmm. And then you have the Huldra that have a very complicated relationship with the Otherworld. There's been quite a lot of beings from that world that have really made things very hard for the Huldra, especially in certain regions.
Yes, that actually tied into the quest for the Book of Dawn, where you have the whole backstory of the Huldra being turned against each other by the Lady Rowan and Neva of the Golden Hair. So, like Matt said, they have a complicated relationship. So, going back to the Book of Dawn itself, the Alfar are the elves who, when the world was divided into the four kingdoms, every living entity, every mind that dwelled in the Dawn, where they had infinite freedom, they could change themselves as they willed, was now forced to make a choice of what sort of form were they going to take and where were they going to dwell. And the Alfar are some of those entities who clung to the Dawn as best as they could, but chose this new form, which they became the elves, the high elves, if you will, the Dawn elves. And they looked around the world for whatever remaining pockets of Dawn energy they could find. And when we talk about Dawn energy, it's this sort of protoplasmic substance that still responds to pure willpower, which is why Dawn magic is so powerful. It's basically you take this potential energy and you shape it into literally whatever you want. The problem is the world used to be suffused with this energy so that you could just, I'm going to form a chair right there so you can sit down. And now I'm going to weave, I'm going to build a tower out of music and it will exist because I've chosen to manifest it from the world. But now Dawn energy is limited. There's these little pockets of it hidden here and there, usually sort of tucked between the mortal world and the other world. And the Alfar find these pockets and they build their settlements in these little sub-dimensions, where they're as close to the glories of Luminius and the Dawn Era as possible. Ioth was an Alfar archmage who mastered Dawn magic and mastered other forms of magic, and he was sad about the Dawn Era, and he wanted to remember its glories, but he also knew there was no going back, right? This is the way the world is now. So he took on a mentor role, trying to teach all the other species, the non-elves, everyone who arose after the Four Kingdoms and didn't remember the Dawn Era, tried to infuse in them a sense of this glory and this beauty, but also share with them all the information that the Alfar and their kin had access to since they were older. And so
he was like the nice proto-Sin.
Yeah. So he gathered them all and he formed this magical academy built on a nexus of ley lines and in a Dawn pocket. And the Book of Dawn is the culmination of all of his work. It's this book that contains all of his knowledge, and it's tied to a pocket of Dawn energy, a big one, which is why it is so powerful, why it can do almost anything but up to a limit, because when you use it, you are expending some of the remaining Dawn energy in the world, taking that infinite potential and making it finite, turning it into something real. And because of that reason, there is no book of night, dusk, or noon, or at least there isn't one yet.
Or not known. It could be that the Dalkalfar might have a book of night, but we just haven't gotten to it yet.
That's true. I feel like they wouldn't do a book. I feel like they do something else, but that's entirely...
Yeah, it wouldn't be book. I think it would, like you said, it would
a
take on
commensurate
different
artifact.
Forms. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we don't currently have something called night magic, although I think that's cool.
I think night magic is adjacent to what we're working on for our necrotic magic in a way.
Yeah, it kind of is. We've done a good job here of, the Necronomicon, exactly. All right, we've done a pretty good job of filling out our hour here. Let's go back and see if we actually hit all of our original questions. We talked about... Where the hell did these go? We've been chatting.
I wanted to touch on. So we did talk about mainly what the Otherworld was. Mm-hmm. We discussed a bit about what sort of creatures dwell there. I think we were kind of dancing around it. We got a bit, sidetracked by a few other topics, but they were very good topics. Mm-hmm. I think what I would like to do with our last 10 minutes would be to confirm exactly what is the difference between a spirit and a fae, and where the other world really ties into Anacra. We did a good job of that, but I feel like kind of putting a nice bow on that would be a nice way to end it.
I agree. So all Fae are spirits, but not all spirits are Fae. That's my take.
Yes.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I figure what is a Fae is effectively what would be kind of the carryover from Dawn. Like I think it's possible. Don't get me wrong, there are still new Fae that are happening, but I feel like a mortal could have the potential to eventually become a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose in a way that would make them a Fae. But
less likely. It's unlikely. It can happen, but it's not likely.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd say that Fae are denizens of the otherworld. Like, they are inherently denizens of the otherworld. They are usually denizens of the otherworld that have a tie of some sort to the mortal world. They are suffused with the energy of the otherworld, which one would call Fae magic, right? It's its own sort of type of energy. It's not Dawn magic. It is wild and whimsical and capricious and uncontrolled, and it has to do with enchanting the mind and nature. Those are the main aspects of Fae magic are appearances, emotions, and nature. Romanticism, the magic.
And I think you hit the nail on the head in regards that if you are a Fae, you are a denizen of the other world, but you get visitation rights to other realms. Whereas I feel like a spirit could really border the underworld, the mortal realm, and the other world. Yeah, I feel like a spirit is kind of loosely defined, but I feel like the big thing that makes a spirit is that a spirit is not locked into the other world. A spirit borders, usually I think 2 months, maybe more. They're not quite at home in either, but they live this very, esoteric isn't the right word, but this border life. They don't have anywhere they truly belong.
A liminal existence.
They're kind of a bit of both, Exactly. Now, and like you said, you can either have a very limited existence where you, for instance, are the spirit of like a river, or you can be like we said, one of our heroes of legend that did so much in life that their life force couldn't just be recycled or contained. It lingered, and it seeks to inspire others in a sense. Like for instance, you have that one sage of yours that resides in the underworld. I feel like that's like kind of like one of Tiresias is like kind of like a really good example of what like an OG. He's not like an undead creature. I don't think you could call Tiresias a he. This being that is Tiresias is
Tiresias.
It's almost like that being is just knowledge. It's just forgotten knowledge. It's lost knowledge. You don't come to Tiresias and just ask any old question. It's what you're going to ask. You get down there and you ask one question, and boom. Because now that you've asked, it's kind of like when you cast, what is that one? Speak with Undead or whatever, and you have it has a 10-day cooldown. I feel like Tiresias has like a year cooldown. Once you've talked to it, it like looks up, answers the question, and now is dormant until it has enough energy to get back into answering again.
It also has to be fed with blood, but that's a tale for another day. Let's talk about how you become a spirit. So the normal life cycle. Let's put Ramius out of the question, because before Ramius came along, the normal life cycle for most creatures was that upon death, your body rots, which means your elements are undergoing entropy, decomposing, and those will return to the wellspring to be recycled into, dirt and air and other stuff. And the same thing happens to your life essence. So your life energy also returns to the wellspring, to the underworld. It undergoes entropic decay. It's recycled, and then it's brought back into the world. So people have to keep dying in order for there to be new life, because that life energy comes from somewhere. I don't have an exact one-to-one for it, but if there was a nation where they stopped everyone from dying there at all, that nation would also experience no new birth, or new births would slow down because there just wouldn't be life energy for them. So it's this very much birth, life, death, and renewal. You undergo death, you cross over, you are reconstituted back into the universe in some new form. And it's usually not like, oh, you directly reincarnate into Bob. It's more like your life energy is going to become part of these different 5 people. And that's the normal fates upon death. That's the original way that death worked in Anacra for most entities. There are some spins on it. Maybe your life energy is reconstituted, and because of the type of creature you are, it actually goes into the other world, and your people's souls are constituted from otherworldly energies. Sure.
Because like you said, much like with general rules, there is a general rule which how the cycle works, but there can be amendments depending on, and hence why it is so important to, even though unlike in Farron, you don't have to, if like, for instance, if you're an atheist in Anacra, you don't get put on a wall of bad, faithless, Turks, and you're just stuck there forever. You just get recycled like everybody else. But if you do subscribe to a particularly powerful faith that has something to do with death and rebirth, it might be a bit different for you. And especially after Ramius and other beings start taking over the dimensions of the underworld,
things messing with the afterlife.
Things change radically. Exactly. And I think spirits is one of the animism that goes into a lot of the original hero spirits. Is one of the first early world things that changes how death in a very subtle way.
And I think that the process of becoming a spirit is sort of like starting a nuclear reactor, where most radioactive material just undergoes decay, right? But if you get enough of it in one place and subject it to the right conditions, it becomes this self-sustaining reaction, or it explodes. And becoming a spirit is similar. And one of the core things to becoming a spirit is you need a catalyst for your transformation. That catalyst could be the faith of a nation. It could be, having just so many people believe in you and shout your name in battle and stuff. That alone could cause you to become a spirit upon death instead of just going through the process. Hell, it could reconstitute you after death. Like if you die and your soul stuff gets disseminated amongst multiple people, but then a whole bunch of people years after your death start believing in you, it might, it's not the same original energy, but your identity might be reconstituted.
Cutting you off just a bit, the idea that I had that I wanted to share with you about it was, I was thinking it was very similar. It's almost like becoming a spirit is, this is going to sound weird at first, but it's almost like the process that a archmage will go to become a lich. Although instead of rather locking yourself into an item, you're putting your soul there and not letting it return and doing all these horrible things to get there. Like you said, whether it's something that you purposely do, or like you said, enough thought, energy, will is put into this act to make you that. I feel like it's almost like when you make alcohol, when you ferment something, you're taking the spiritual energy, this soul, and rather than just taking it wholesale and saying, here, back into the cycle with you, you kind of run it through a strainer, and it's almost like you're taking the echo of what, if you boiled down that entity and just took the dregs and just gathered that up and said, here, take 99%
it's the starter for your sourdough.
It's the starter for you take 99% of it and say, here, back into the thing with you, but you take these concepts, because really you figure a spirit isn't a real person anymore. It's not what it once was. It's almost like we said with the Otherworld. It's the idealized version. It's almost like for instance, when people talk about either great figures in the world or even horrible figures in the world, let's just say, for instance, like someone like Hitler, you don't talk about every single facet of what that person is. Hitler's usually broken down into about a half a dozen really crazy things. Or someone like Martin Luther King Jr. People don't know the facet of every single thing about that person, but they're broken down into about a half a dozen really important things.
You've got people who knew them as people, but for everyone else, they're a symbol, an icon, etc.
You take the symbol of what that person is, and I feel like that symbolism, those ideals, that great, or terrible things about them is what becomes a spirit. And they may have a sense of what they were, but I feel like a spirit is an echo of what it once was in life.
Yeah, like that spirit, again, that person may have already died and been recycled. Every single piece of their original energy may have been disseminated, but the concept, the idea of them still exists, and that can form the nucleus of a spirit that is, like you said, in the image of that person. Somebody, depending on how they're idealized and what process they undergo to become a spirit, they may barely recognize their loved ones. Although, like if the spirit of, say, Magnan the Fierce, the founder of Galadron, he exists as a hero deity. And if Magnan had close loved ones, if they were in close contact with this hero deity over time, their investment of ideals and stuff might imbue that spirit deity with some memories, but those memories wouldn't really be like it's coming back to me from me. It'd more be like you are infusing this into me, because that's
absolutely. Or like the house spirits of Kos, they for instance, especially if it was like you're like, oh, I'm the son of like who you were in life, it's like I don't really have a love for you, I have a love for my family, for this house, this entity that I am kind of the guardian of, almost like in a sense like Mulan, you know, like when in the Disney movie they had all the little spirits and all that stuff, and they were the guardians of the house. Instead of them having this very specific, oh yeah, they're going to ruin the farm, that whole shtick, they're not like they were in life. They're not ghosts. They would have this sense that, oh, we have to protect the Fa family, and then for this family or for this region, because really thinking about it, spirits can be locked to a family or they can be locked to a region.
Or an ideal or another concept, right? Like
absolutely,
the nucleus of a spirit requires a cause or symbol. It can't just be like this person. They need to embody something.
And again, coming back to what we were saying originally in the stream about the other world, in order to affect change, you have to be attached to something. And that's what spirits do. You basically are taking the essence, the greatest parts of, or the worst parts of a being, and distilling it, breaking it down, and attaching it to something and giving it new life in a way.
In cost, that's always region, family, culture, and an element. Because when you said you need a catalyst to become a spirit, sometimes that catalyst can be elemental, right? Or it can just be you are so high level, because high level characters in Anacra have this power to them. They're not just really good at what they do. Like they have this legendary actual spark of power to them, and that can be enough to form the catalyst for a spirit.
Hence, when we won't get super into it, but when Marcus becomes the Phoenix Warden, that's the kind of being and then eventual end you get is when you put enough into your life.
And the specific alchemy is going to vary from situation to situation, but they need a cause, or they need an ideal. They need to be the spirit of something, not just a person, right? It has to be that person's attributes: heroism, valor, tyranny, some ideal, and you need a source of energy and that's your nucleus, is your ideal, and then you need a source of energy to be the catalyst that causes you to form a spirit around that nucleus.
And then, I know we're running out of time, but that even doesn't break into the idea of, for instance, regional spirits that weren't it's likely that the spirit, for instance, of a certain mountain or river or tree, they likely weren't a person that said, hey, I like that tree, I want to merge with that tree when I die. It likely just naturally happened over time, especially, I think, in areas that are bordering the other world, or even possibly the underworld of the spirit realm. You will have that ambient energy, or maybe even a specific denizen of that world says, hey, I want to be a part of the mortal realm. I don't just want to come and visit every so often. A dryad might say, you know what, I'm going to merge with this tree and border both the ethereal, not the ethereal, the other world and the mortal realm, and be able to take stock and have a greater presence here.
Yeah.
Things like that.
I agree. And so oftentimes the nucleus of a spirit does not require a mortal soul. It can be, like you said, that's often how animism occurs in practice, is a region, a natural feature, etc., awakens over time, and it doesn't always require mortal intervention.
Absolutely.
Good talk, mate. I feel like
we're not done with this. I kind of want to come back to this. We might just do it on our own time.
Oh no, I mean, it's our show. We can do whatever we want.
Absolutely, but I think there's more to explore for absolutely with the other world, but this was really good.
Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. Thank you, chat, for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Tune in next time. We are currently locked into this 11 a.m. on Fridays time slot. We'll see how long that lasts. We may need to move it for secret reasons, but it's been a lot of fun, and we look forward to doing it again next week. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.